Welcome back to my conversation with Lola Chetti, where we talk about the ICF Code of Ethics and how it affects us as working coaches. If you watched part one, then you've learned a lot, and now you're ready to learn more. So I invite you to watch the full part two to gain even more information and insight as to how to operate properly following the Code of Ethics in your practice. What do you think we should do when we feel in our gut that something maybe just isn't right?
And I think that's such an excellent question, Michael. And if you look at the training, did you do the training on ethics?
I did.
Yeah, so I'm sorry you had an overdose of me, and my colleagues were there, but it was too. Yeah, and the thing is, when I designed the pathway, the journey to ethical maturity, because for the first time, the concept of ethical maturity and growth and awareness came into the code of ethics. You will see, you're so right. It starts actually with a gut feeling, with a discomfort, and even research shows this. And it's almost like a discomfort. My colleague Jonathan Passmore calls it like a discomfortness.
Mm.
So I would say if you look at I don't have it in front of me, so I wrote, the journey. The first thing to do is to lean into it. When we have something niggling at us, the easiest path, just like in real life, is to move away, have a quick fix. No, lean into it. Why am I feeling like this? Let's write down the facts about this case. Are there any red flags that I'm missing? Where is this feeling coming from? Because when we lean into it and we explore and we are doing the work that we ask our clients to do, reflect. And I would say it's the most important work of a coach to reflect on our practice. Then we can have insights and the possibility of seeing whether really there is something or it was just something else. It was the relationship with the coachee. Where is that coming from? Then we can start considering what do we do next? If it's an ethical dilemma or an ethical lapse, which is different from a breach, if it's a direct breach, we need to repair it and be transparent with the client. We need to be honest, show integrity, uphold the integrity of our profession, what we promise to the client, be transparent. But if it's an ethical dilemma, and that's the difference, an ethical dilemma may not be a breach because no code of ethics can contain every unethical behavior. Then it's about reflecting on it, gathering the facts, going to supervision, asking more experienced colleagues, taking time to really understand and then saying, how do I now resolve or manage this? Or is it so serious that I need to opt out? And then I have to add, do the thing that exactly you did that helps everybody else. Share in a confidential way what we did so that we learn and we expand the learning with others.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lola. And I highly recommend to people to look for the journey to ethical maturity. The diagram that Lola is referring to in her response is revealed in the free ICF Code of Ethics course that ICF members are welcome to take as part of gaining continuing education units to renew their credential, but also just to continue to reinforce our understanding of the importance of code of ethics. So you mentioned something that I'd like to follow up on, this difference between potentially a dilemma, a lapse, and a breach. Are all three different considerations?
I wouldn't say they are a different consideration. An ethical lapse can be a breach. It also may not necessarily be a breach and still be an ethical lapse, right? Because ethics is like the sea. It's large, it's everywhere. There is a way for ethics to be needed, whereas the code of ethics is a set of rules and standards that ICF put together, and it's robust, it's solid, but no code of ethics can be complete. And we see that just by watching TV. at the kind of things that happen. So an ethical lapse may and may not be a breach, but there can be an outright breach. An outright breach would be not respecting confidentiality, indulging in self-interested behavior, not being not considering conflict of interest and putting up a plan to resolve and manage it in the interest of the clients, not upholding boundaries in such a way that it hurts our clients. And I would say, let us not forget about the fundamental principle of doing good. And I think this is a strength of ICF, saying doing good it's difficult to measure what it is, but it certainly expects us not only to avoid doing harm, but to go over and above it, and not to do good for our client where ethically possible.
Yeah, thank you for making the distinction here that there are some differences between what might be a lapse that it doesn't necessarily have a rule that's governing the behavior, but as your co-author said, there could be a discomfort there that suggests that you still should lean into that and understand it and seek supervision and so forth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also one way to look at a dilemma, it's usually a case where all the solutions we're looking for are equally under or are all undesirable. We cannot find a win-win. Whatever we do, there is something to lose. And this is a dilemma, as we don't have a good way out of it.
Mhm. So speaking of dilemmas, sometimes we might witness what we feel is a dilemma or a lapse. What should we do when we're in a group engagement? So there are multiple coaches working on an engagement with an organization, and we feel that one of our fellow coaches has had an ethical lapse.
Here, Michael, I would say again, it's very context driven. If I'm taking ethical lapse to be something which is not a direct breach, or it's something maybe not speaking properly with respect to a client, so yes, it would be a breach as well, not to be respectful. I would go and speak to the person, and the code of ethics has changed. Before it said we have to report. Now it's about speaking and engaging with the client. So we go and speak to the person, and it will be contextual. We have to look and this is again ethical awareness, ethical reasoning, and ethical decision making. And ethical decision making is thinking, what is the impact on me? What is the impact on others? What is the impact on the initiative? How does this person react to what I'm saying? Is there an effort to repair? Is there a self-awareness? It could be that if there isn't, then the next step is to go and ask the person leading the initiative and saying, I will have to say this, and we can have a conversation, because is it sufficiently, it all depends on the case, evaluating, what are the values that we're bringing, who are we working for? And I would say, for example, not respecting a client, I would go and speak to the person one-to-one, and usually among coaches it's resolved. But if it's not, what do we do then? I would say it could even be taken all the way depending on the seriousness. Let's say, for example, if it was as serious as breaking confidentiality, I would then let's think of a case what I got in mentoring, supervision. One coach actually, for example, reports what the other coach said in a group coaching, which itself is very problematic if it's not contracted for. Then I think it deserves reporting, and it even deserves, in the end, if we think we're not serving our client's best interest, to withdraw, even if we are not responsible for this lapse.
So taking it a step further, trying to understand the ICF process, how does the ICF deal with the report of a breach? Because I think a lapse isn't really necessarily a breach, but a breach is a breach, and that a rule within the code of ethics was broken. And when that is reported to the ICF, what do they do?
Okay, I'm not speaking on behalf of the ICF, and I'm going to be as precise as possible because I think, well, let me just reflect on it, Michael. I think when a person reports, there is an ethics hotline, then they are directed to a decision tree which actually tells them whether they can go forward and report the breach or not. Then they fill in a form, and in that form, they are asked about the breach, to say, all the facts. And then they also give any proof that they may have. Then there is an initial review. It's a very thorough process. It's the ECR process, ethical conduct review process. So there is that allegation of breach. There is the decision tree. So the client, and if they are given the permission to proceed, then there is an initial review team who then writes to the coach, gets the answer of the coach, and then they look at whether there is, on the face of it, on the face of the allegation, would that be considered a breach of ethics? And very importantly, I was going to miss that. We also have to think, they also have to check whether the coach is an ICF coach, because ICF only is able to enforce accountability on somebody who's a member, an ICF professional, right? Or somebody who's in their ecosystem as well, somebody who's a member. And the ECR process is really for people, for members, coaches within coaching. Then they also look at, the answers, and they decide whether there is a case to go through, and they inform the parties, and they tell them about, the need of how they have to come in. They will have to go in front of, first, there is an IT team, an investigation team, which, if I'm not mistaken, is appointed by, there is a leadership team of a few people, and there is an operations director or an operations manager or a director who then appoints two to three people before two people to look into the case. So these people will then hear, and they have to be completely unknown to the coach or completely unconnected to any part of this investigation. And so they are absolutely neutral, and they come and they listen to both parties, look at the evidence, and they write a report. So it's not a finding, it's not an evaluation. It's actually saying, in respect of the alleged breach, oh, and this I forgot, there must be at least one allegation of a breach of the code, because ECR process doesn't look at ethical lapses. It looks at breaches, alleged breaches of the code of ethics, and then there's also the code of conduct. So then they look at the formulated alleged breach, the standard, and what is, and they just write, this is the evidence presented, right? No determination at this level. And then it goes to another completely unconnected set of two or three people, the final review team, who actually looks at all this evidence. They may also listen to all the interviews, consider the evidence, and it's for them to make a finding of breach or no breach. If it's a no breach, the parties are informed. If it's a breach, the coach is informed, and then they usually, the ICF, the ECR process really focuses on taking an informational and a developmental approach, right? So there can be a learning plan. However, it all depends. Context matters. If the breach is so serious, the impact on the client then it can go all the way to a withdrawal of membership and credential.
This sounds like a fairly comprehensive and lengthy process. Uh, can a coach who is going through such a process continue to conduct themselves and run their practice?
That's been my experience, that they
Mhm.
do continue their practice until a decision is made.
It would seem to make sense since a decision hasn't been made yet
Yeah,
that you
yeah.
shouldn't withhold someone's opportunity to continue to make a living in their craft. But as the viewer, if you are truly interested in getting a definitive answer, you should seek that answer from the ICF directly.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So this has been so interesting and helpful, Lola, as I imagine
Thank
that it would
you.
be. I'd like to just ask one final question, which is, do you have any parting advice to newer coaches who are generally my viewing audience as to how to take this subject on and really seek to avoid ethical dilemmas in the first place? Like what do you think they should consider and do to avoid these types of circumstances, which are troubling? They're troubling. They can cause us to lose sleep and make us question and reflect over long periods of time. As you see, I still reflect on that engagement from many, many years ago. So, any advice that you have there?
I'll give my own advice here, Michael. This is my view. I think self-development matters. We don't come to ethics with a blank page, none of us. We come to ethics already with the kind of ethics that from the environment and the experience that we've had. And that's why, for example, in my course, the first module is about self-awareness, know yourself. And it's about knowing yourself, knowing how do I behave when I'm under pressure? What is my behavior when I have self-interest? What is usually my behavior when money is an issue, right? Because all this play a role into how we respond, into our ethical identity, right? And when I teach students, what I say, it's what you bring to the table is going to make a huge impact. The first thing is to know yourself and to be always asking the question about the choices you make and how does that align with the ethics of our profession and preserving the integrity of our profession and doing good for our clients. I would say one, this. Secondly, it's engaging, and I hope during the training, engaging deeply with the code of ethics, because most trainers would be people who I believe, like me, have had intense experience in executive coaching. So they've had ethical dilemmas. So being able to speak with them, ask questions. How does that play? Because coaching is not just a methodology, it's a way of being. It's also an ethical way of being, an ethical way. And can we avoid ethical dilemmas? I don't think so. And this
Oh,
is only my answer because there's people behavior, there are things, no matter, I think it starts with robust contracting. And it's always after the event that we learn. That's how I now ask about, what's your position on people who ask for support wanting to leave. So it's only after we've faced the fire and or we've listened to others, yeah, like you bringing your case. So I think we can make really robust contracting, ask the questions, clarity of objectives, going further than objectives, saying, I like asking sponsors, what are the results that you need to see to consider this objective to be successful? And then align it with the client. Is the client ready to work on these results? If they're not, well, we better be careful, right?
yeah.
Because it's also about our reputation. I think robust contracting, but can we avoid ethical dilemmas? The more we work with, if you work one-to-one, I think it's easier. The moment there is more than one person, like in any relationship, there is more interest, more dynamics of power. And this, it means there is the potential for different dilemmas to crop up.
Well, thank you very much, Lola. This has been incredibly informative and useful, and I know our viewers are going to benefit greatly by better understanding ethical principles and how it impacts their world as a coach.
Well, I hope I was wise, but really, I thank you for bringing, also bringing, inviting me, bringing your case, and also challenging me to think, because your questions were really challenging. And we always learn when we are challenged.
As a co-author of a book on ethical principles, I
Yes,
think your answers are generally quite solid. So
if I may
please,
show my book
yes, so
to the
please
author.
go and purchase
Yeah,
this book to better understand what
how
ethical
to do it.
maturity looks like. Yeah,
Exactly. Thank you very much, Michael.
it was my pleasure, Lola. Thank you.